Hi, I'm Doug Keck, and welcome to the Catholic Sphere. You know, each week we bring you an insightful discussion on the latest issues facing the Catholic Church and the culture we live in from a theological perspective. Today, we're discussing the state of Catholic digital ministry. Up first, we have the president of EWTN Digital, Sean Graber. He joins us from New Jersey. Next, we have the president of EWTN Studios, Peter Gagnon. He joins us here from Irondale, and last but certainly not least, we have our own EWTN Vice President of Theology, the one and only Colin Donovan joins us once again from our theology studio. Thank you, very busy set of gentlemen, finding some time to spend some time on the Catholic Sphere. And we're going to start talking about, kind of digital programming, things like that, and the whole digital space. We hear about it all the time. And so, Sean, that seems to be right in your title. So let's talk a little bit about what it means when we start talking about, Catholic digital ministry. And how do you view that? And certainly, how do you view that in relation to EWTN?
Yeah, well, thank you, Doug, for the introduction. Digital ministry can mean so many different things, but in the context of EWTN, I think our viewers are well aware that, we have a very long history as a broadcast television network, which has been a very important part of getting our message to the world. Now, we have increasingly more tools at our disposal. So we have websites and apps, and, this is really the way in which, people are encountering the message that we're putting out there. They're using these tools to facilitate their faith life, to learn and grow in their faith. And so really it is, it's sort of ever ancient, ever new. It's just a new way, a new means by which we can do the thing that we've been doing for a very long time, which is to share the faith.
Right. Do you see this on a global level, on a parish level as well? How do you think those intersect, or will they?
Yeah, and that's the interesting thing about the digital world. There is this global aspect to it. When you launch a website, that website, in many cases is available all around the world for anyone to see. So you create this, this means by which you can reach really anyone in the world. But the church is universal in that sense, but it's also local. And so, at the end of the day, what we don't want to do is create a relationship or a dependency on any of the digital media or products that we're creating, but really facilitate, the relationship at the parish level, the relationship in person, this corporeal sort of experience that we have of people going and, receiving the sacraments, being in communion with one another in the real world. And I think some of the more interesting things that we're doing in the digital space are those things that bring people together in the real world and reinforce that relationship.
Well, let me ask you, Peter, from a programming perspective, obviously you've been with EWTN. You've been with EWTN longer than I have over the years, and have been involved with all aspects of promotion and programming over the years, and production, et cetera, like that. So how do you see, the aspect of what you've been doing all along, bridging itself into this digital world? Does it change the way programming is made, or how you view programming?
It does, because, when you had, and you still have EWTN and our linear channel, and people watch that as a whole, and you have our schedule throughout the day, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, there's content on EWTN. And so people would, tune in, either have it on all day, or they would hit particular programs they like. They want to watch the Mass at a certain time, or they'd have to schedule their schedule around that. Now, with the digital space, it's mostly on demand. We still do our stream, and we still have our full lineup rolling of people who want to watch that, but it's both different experiences and how they're receiving that content. So instead of somebody watching EWTN, they're watching it on here on their phones, right? They're watching it on demand. We still want to provide like the living room experience, but the living room experience is now them clicking and finding a program they want. So we have to gear our content to kind of hit the audience and engage the audience, the younger audience, particular, that is using these means, these different forms of receiving the content. For example, we had so many great stories, and Doug, you would know more than anyone, of people who would be scrolling through their TV channels. They come upon this nun and they get inspired. Well, now how are we going to catch those people? Because they're scrolling through and they're looking at their shorts, right? And they see all these different things. And we want to be able to have content that grabs them initially, but then also brings them to the deeper content, because it's about transformation. It's about inspiration, encouragement that Mother Angelica want to do. We got to continue to do that with the content, but it's different styles and formats.
So is it also something from a stylistic perspective, is things are presented sometimes in different ways, in different formats, and at different lengths to try to engage all the possibilities, right?
Yeah, 100%. And one thing we're really focusing on is like the quality, because people are really tuning into like the quality of productions, because they want to see on EWTN the same quality. Now we have the great content, and we'll always have that, but they want to see the same visual quality and even better that they're seeing out there in the secular world. So we have to continue to basically up our game in the quality end of things, while continuing and being consistent with the content in what we're providing.
Right, and that's a great balancing act that you have to do, which you've got to appeal to more people in many ways, but keep the content still solid. Colin, from a theological perspective, one of the things, and it harkens back to what Sean said earlier, Pope Francis said virtual contact is insufficient, doesn't contribute to a true encounter and to solidarity, and he warned against news at the services of ideology and not truth. How do you see that from a theological perspective here at EWTN, in a sense of monitoring some of what we're doing across the board?
Well, he was echoing there actually something from the Second Vatican Council in its document on social communications, and that as that new means. In those days they had the traditional means of TV and radio and newspapers and magazines and so on. But it envisioned that there would be new technologies that would be invented that could then be used to spread the gospel to various places. So the thing that distinguishes our use of these social means of communication today, and the different kinds of things that are possible today, is the idea we're spreading the gospel, we're evangelizing, we're doing what the council asked for, we're doing what all the popes have asked for. We're doing what is our baptismal obligation, even as lay people, not to be simply passive receivers of the gospel, but to share that good news with other people. And so the more extensively you can do that, the more completely the gospel could be spread around the world. You know, it's sort of always interesting. Mother talked very often about this passage in the book of Revelation about the angel, spreading the good news from the heavens and so on. And so we're trying to do that, but it means that we can do it from satellites, we can do it from radio and TV, but as Peter said, we have to also be able to do it on the other forms of electronic devices. You know, he left out watch. You can now, on your watch, you can look up content, doctrinal content. So in EW's situation, we're proclaiming the gospel as Christ and the church have asked us to do, but also because we wish to be faithful to what was Mother's inspiration that's codified, if you will, in our mission statement, which is to support the Roman magisterium in the spreading of the good news to the whole world.
So Sean, one of the things, people hear about, all the digital technology, all things, AI is the big buzzword, and if you go out on the net, there's a lot of cross purposes in the sense of how people view it. Even obviously Pope Leo has indicated his concern about AI and what that may or may not mean for the faithful and the dignity of human beings. How is EWTN's digital outreach looking at that?
Well, as someone who's spent most of his career in the technology space, I can say that the pace of AI advancement is dizzying, especially since the end of last year. It feels like every week there is some phase change in what we're able to do and what AI is able to accomplish. And it's interesting, I think there are different schools of thought, and no one really knows exactly how AI is going to impact society. I tend to be more on the optimistic side and see AI as a tool, maybe a very advanced tool that can do things that were impossible up to this point, but it really is a tool that we need to use at the service of humanity, and within EWTN's context, at the service of our mission. And so it really can never replace the human element, but it can amplify what we're able to do. It can make us more efficient. I think, as in all things, it really requires prudence and judgment as to how to incorporate this in a way that respects the human person, creates transparency, and doesn't interpose some sort of artificial humanity between people, or between people in their faith, or between people and Christ. And so, we're very thoughtful about that, and we're looking at ways to experiment, but always with an eye towards transparency and trust, and maintaining that trust that we've built over the last number of decades.
Right. So, Peter, from a programming perspective, with when you're reaching out, the importance of your television audience versus your digital native audiences, how do you go about reaching them differently?
Yeah, so it's different type of content for the digital audience. We do a lot of short form content focused on, for example, our great series James the Less, which just season 3, the conclusion of the series is on YouTube, right, and it's on our digital platform EWTN Plus. So that is more difficult to put on our broadcast channel, but it's a type of content that the digital folks are looking for. The young people are looking for that content, but there's also interest from our broadcast audience. So that is a bridge to bring them over to the digital, because the linear channels hopefully will continue, but we don't know for how long. A lot of cable systems are actually closing down now, and not even offering that anymore. So we want to bring our audience to say, hey, look, you're still going to get all the great content you had when you watched our broadcast channel, but it's just on digital, and it may be a different style, and you might, but you might even get a better experience, because like on our Plus platform, you can log in, you can create a user experience, you can pick up where you left off, you can be guided as to, you like this program, you might like this other one. So those are the different ways that we're gonna bring the two audiences together.
Right. Let me throw that, because Peter brought it up, and throw that back to you, Sean, the idea, signing up. A lot of people, find that kind of, before I didn't have to sign up, I just could go someplace. Now all of a sudden people are forcing me to sign up. Am I giving my information away? Am I going to be inundated with, requests for certain things? Or is my privacy going to be given away? Why are we doing that? What is the impact, kind of picking up what Peter said, the benefit of that?
It's a great question. And just to be clear, we don't require sign up for the use of our products. And I think that goes back to the way the Mother wanted these things to be, free and at the service of the church. So that is our stance. However, if you do want to sign up, there are certain features that we can provide to you as a result of knowing who you are. So as Peter said, you can start watching something on your TV and then pick it up later on our website on your phone. We might get to know the kinds of content that you're interested in, so we can better recommend content to you. Of course, if we have your email address, we can stay in touch and tell you about new content that's coming out, new products that we're releasing. We'd also love to solicit your feedback, so you can help shape some of the work that we're doing at EWTN. And we really want to invite some folks into the process to shape that. So there are a lot of advantages, and I talk about this sometimes, this concept of digital pastoral accompaniment. When you talk to a spiritual director, someone, who can guide you in the faith, they need to get to know you and where you are in your faith journey. Now, digital is no replacement for that by any stretch of the imagination, but the more that we can get to know our users, I think the better experience that we can provide. So for those users that want to opt into that experience, I think there's a great payoff, but to be clear, that's not a requirement, and we want to make sure that our content is free and accessible for folks, regardless of their perspective.
That's great. Absolutely. That was absolutely Mother's intention. So, Colin, let me ask you, kind of like from a theological perspective, when we're reaching out to these new audiences, how do we deal with the fact that we make sure that in doing that and reaching out to some degree on a decentralized basis, more programming maybe coming from other independent sources, et cetera, to make sure we stay on the straight and narrow?
Well, certainly, it's the job of everyone at EWTN to do that, and we have a great team here. We've always had ever since I've been here, because we have people who are intensely in love with the faith, and they see things. If they see something that it doesn't look right, they'll bring it to management's attention. So there's that. There's also the previewing of things we get from outside, which my department does, whether it's acquired programming or books that will be used, and so on. So there are those kinds of things, and there is, of course, our long history with many authors and speakers that are regulars on EWTN in some way. So all of those things add together to try to promote a particular, not an ideology of the Catholic faith, of any strain of it, but rather something that is, consistent with the teaching of the church, at the same time has the possibility of different expressions of it as the church herself tolerates. And so we do have a variety of programs aimed at different audiences, because as Aquinas always said, or wrote rather, that when we're giving guidance or fraternal correction or whatever it is to another, you have to know their circumstance. You have to be able to give it to them in a way that they will be open to receiving and accepting it. And I think this gives us more possibilities of doing that rather than few, of reaching people where they're at and helping them move forward in their life of faith.
So, Peter, one of the charges we have always had over the years with EWTN is obviously the idea we're just preaching to the choir. So the question is, are we preaching to the choir online, or are we reaching the unaffiliated? And is our approach, from your perspective, one of apologetic storytelling or witness? And which one do you think is the most effective way to evangelize? And you've seen, let's say, feedback from those kinds of programs.
Yeah, I think storytelling is probably the key way to reach people. We've seen that. You see that, Jesus was the best storyteller of all time. The parables, right? The greatest stories of how to understand, the faith, understand God our Father, and so that's the area that we really want to focus on, is storytelling. Mother Angelica was a fantastic storyteller.
Absolutely.
And so we want to continue that, but continue that in creative ways. I'll use, again, the example of James the Less was a great story. Well written, it's fun, it's funny, it's entertaining, but it also teaches you the faith, The Seeking Beauty series that we recently debuted with David Henry is you're following the story of David searching for beauty in all these different areas. So it's how you're telling the story. And we're going to have a wide variety. We still have the very catechetical type of content, which is very important. We want people to learn the faith, to understand the faith. We want to encourage people who are trying to live the faith. But we also want to bring the new people in. So I like to say, similar to what Colin just mentioned, is we have content wherever you are on your spiritual journey. You could be a nun, but not a N-U-N, but N-O-N-E-S.
Right.
But and you turn in,
Or
you see
you could
this,
be a nun.
or you could be a nun
either end
on
of
the other
spectrum,
end.
right?
Well, that's
Yeah,
the whole
right.
thing. And
Right.
so you could be a nun, or you could be a daily communicant.
Right.
What we hope is that if the nuns see something on our programming or on our digital channels and feeds, that they'll then slowly maybe end up being a daily communicant, because they're going to go from one program to the next, and we're going to feed them along the way, and we're going to journey with them.
Let me ask you, and this kind of bridges between Peter and Sean, but Sean, when we talk about reaching out digitally, how do we gauge success? Is it based upon what our metrics tells us, how many people are watching? Is that the way we drive what we want to do in the future? Or how do we balance that act between giving people what they need versus maybe sometimes what they like?
The theme of so much of this, I think it really comes down to prudence. And you would know far better than I, but Mother eschewed ratings for a very long time because she felt that if a program saved even one soul, it was worth doing. And so she never had ratings, and then as a result never used ratings in making programming decisions. It's really different in the digital world, because when you put a video on YouTube, you can't help but get the data. It's really a feature of the product. And so we have access to so much data. And just to maybe supplement what Peter was saying, we can see in the data that we are reaching people that are likely not subscribed to cable at all, and so aren't watching our linear feed. And that's a beautiful thing, because we're bringing this message to people who may not otherwise have gotten it. And so we do have these metrics, and they can be, if they are used in a prudent way, in the context of our broader mission, they can help us identify ways in which we can improve. Maybe series, we find someone who's really great, we want to do more with that person, or we can identify parts of a program where maybe the audience is losing a little bit of interest, and they turn away. Well, that might help us evaluate next time, how can we make our content more effective? And so I think this is where EWTN differs a lot from a traditional media company that might live and die by the ratings. We don't do that, because we know that, as you well said, Doug, we want to give people things that are exciting and entertaining, but we also want to give them those teachings that they need to hear that might be hard for them to hear. And so the metrics are part of the story, but they're certainly not the whole story.
All right. Colin, let me ask you the question, because obviously with all the various digital influencers out there, and even some of what, people used to kind of say to us, well, where do you guys get off preaching or teaching the Catholic faith, who died and left you in charge, so to speak. But how does the church, how does EWTN in your mind, and let's say the church from a theological perspective, deal with the kind of independent influencers who are out there who may be well-intentioned, but maybe not always correct in their perspectives?
Well, obviously, as far as those that we will promote, so on the radio side, we have our various podcasters and so on, and we're doing things of that nature on the TV side as well. These are generally people that we've already know, and we already know, that their faith is solid, and they're promoting something that somebody wants to hear to develop their own faith life. So that's one of the ways we do it. And I think the difficulty is often going to be, Sean maybe alluded to this, when you see in his discussion of the metrics, when you see that something maybe is not getting interest, well, it may tell you this is not the best way to evangelize as well. And so the packaging is important for the evangelization, not in and of itself. As you noted, in commercial television, it's you've got to get the advertising dollars, and you've got to get all of those things which keep the company going monetarily. But relying on God's providence, you can be a little bit freer, and you can do the things and make the switches that are necessary to reach those people who need to be reached. And that was always something Mother did very well, and we all who have been here a long time know the stories of the person, as you said earlier, going through the television in the middle of the night.
Peterson,
and even, not even being, the guy watching let's say an immoral channel, who then finds his nun, but his clicker no longer works, and he's stuck on this channel and listening, and then he finds a deeper content there that he's interested in. So God can do his part, but we've got to give him something to work with, and that's our job.
Right. Peter, let me ask you, in bridging, the broadcast into the digital world, as you talked about before, how do you figure out, your focus in the sense of, do you think people are more looking for teaching, inspiration, challenges, or entertainment, or is it a mix?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of a mix, and I think you can have content that is entertaining. I hear actually more and more, particularly from families with younger children, saying we'd love to have some type of wholesome entertainment, Catholic entertainment that we can sit together as a family and watch.
Right.
So, but you have to bridge the inspiration. You have to bring in the challenge, as Colin and Sean said. We have to challenge people to live out their faith. But you can do a lot of that in entertaining ways, as long as you're staying faithful to what the message is, and you're not even unintentionally making a mockery or something like that. So we're very careful when we're looking at projects, and we're working because we work with a lot of out-of-house Catholic creatives and producers who really want to do a lot of really great things in service of the church and for the good of souls. But we have to look at what they're offering to say, that's not quite what EWTN's mission is in that program. So we want to, encourage, inspire, uplift, and challenge, but do that in entertaining ways, and just always having that balance.
Well, let me ask you from a programming perspective, how much of an impact does it have you in the sense that you have to raise money, obviously, through the network? As you said, the programming you want to do is you want it to be better. Unfortunately, that usually means to some degree more expensive. It
often means much more expensive.
Right.
And so in order to do that, particularly because the content that we would really like to produce, and working with out-of-house producers, it is a lot more expensive to produce something like that, like a travel series going throughout Europe, than it is to do a studio production that we've done here, typically over the years. So there's a mix. We're really hoping that the people who see this new content and are inspired by it will then be inspired to say, I love this, I would love to see EWTN do more, so I'm going to contribute to that, especially those younger people who right now probably aren't used to contributing for content unless it's like subscription based. They might be used to that, or they're even getting tired of that. But yeah, we need to, we really do need to increase our budgets in order to continue to do this type of content that we want to do to the service of our audience.
Right. Well, let me ask you, Sean, you got a minute to sell us all on the future of digital as it relates to EWTN and what you're doing?
Well, digital is where people increasingly are spending time. So when you look at media trends, people are spending time on YouTube, they're spending time on Instagram, they're spending time on the new social network that has yet to be created. And so if we want to go out and evangelize in this day and age, we need to be in those spaces as well. We need to sanctify those spaces. We need to bring compelling storytelling to those spaces. And yes, then bring them into our channel or onto our webpage or into our applications, where it's sort of an oasis and a safe place where all of the content is orthodox and wonderful. But in order to get them, we need to go into those places where they are spending time and show up and show up in a way that also feels native to those places. It needs to be beautiful, to Peter's point. It needs to have high production value and look great. That, I think, is our duty to glorify God in some sense, but also there's a more prosaic reason. If it's not beautiful, if it doesn't look like it belongs, they're not going to click. And so I think we have to be there. And again, it's ever ancient, ever new. We're doing what EWTN has always done, but the landscape has shifted, and so therefore our response has to shift, and we have to show up in those places.
Absolutely. I'd like to thank the panel for spending time with us here. That would be Sean, Peter, and Colin. And of course, we thank you, our audience, for joining us. And don't forget to join us next time right here on the Catholic Sphere. We will bring you another topic dealing with theological issues in the Catholic Church, something to think about. We'll see you next time on the Catholic Sphere.